I think they both have essentially the same problem. They're slightly different. I think with Labour, you've seen them in office, and they have palpably failed to grow our economy in the way that they could have done if they'd taken different choices. So lots of borrowing and spending and taxing and so on, high unemployment, higher inflation, and all of those kind of things. With Reform, of course, what they are is a populist party that simply is prepared to say absolutely anything in order to get a headline and to try and get some votes that way, but without doing the hard work of actually explaining how you're going to pay for some of these promises. And that really is the road to ruin.
Well, we can now return to the Conservatives and speak to the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Mel Stride MP. Hello to you.
Good morning, Adam.
First of all, you are the constituency MP for where Anne Whitikham was living. This is clearly a shocking and horrific event. What is your response to it?
Well, clearly it is shocking, as you say, Adam, and my heart goes out to her family, to her friends and the many people who knew and met Anne. She was an extraordinary woman in many ways. I think she was somebody who clearly had very strongly held views, strong convictions. Not everybody agreed with those, but nonetheless you knew where she stood. But at the same time, it seemed to me that she combined it with a kind of personality that cut through to people in terms of often having quite a strong sense of humour, a twinkle in her eye, and a laugh that I won't forget. I did spend some time going around the constituency with her shortly after being elected as the Member of Parliament in Central Devon and going to church fetes and all sorts of events. And she was a big draw and a kind of one-off, really.
And presumably you are being kept informed on the police investigation.
Yes, I've spoken with the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall. It appears that their work is proceeding at considerable pace, and it's notable, of course, that there has now been an arrest of a 28-year-old up in Yorkshire who is a key suspect at this stage. But I wouldn't want to get drawn into speculating really any further than that.
No, I understand that. The police did say initially that they didn't think there was any terror or political link to this crime. As far as you know, is that still the situation?
I only know what is out there in the public domain, and you're absolutely right. That is what they have said, that they do not believe that there is a terrorist link to this tragic incident. But I know no more than that at this stage.
Now let's turn to your mandate as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. You are making an announcement today attacking the government for the increase in debt. I've got to put it to you, I think debt now stands at something like £126 billion, and more than 100 of 100 billion of that was actually under the Conservatives over the last 14 years of Conservative rule.
Okay, so the debt is actually around 100% of the size of the economy, so it's something over £2 trillion in total.
No, it's the increase I was talking
about debt having... Yes, exactly. Yeah, sorry, you said the debt was at £106 billion. But anyway, no. Look, you're right to challenge here. But let's bear something in mind. I mean, in 2010, when we first came into office, we inherited a huge level of borrowing, or a deficit, that the Labour government was engaged in. And we had to get that down. And by the time of COVID...
Yeah, but you put it up.
In fact, we had got the deficit... whilst you're getting the borrowing down through time, by definition, the debt will, of course, be rising. But the point that I'm making is that when we got to the sort of foothills of COVID, we'd actually got on top of the deficit. We then had to step in and preserve jobs through furlough and business bounce back loans and all sorts of other things, which of course added to the debt, and nobody at that time was suggesting we should not be making those moves. In fact, they suggested much more than that. And so that has been a response to that kind of shock that we had to the economy. What's happened with this government is they haven't had those same levels of shocks, reduction in the size of the economy by 10% overnight due to COVID, and yet they have had additional borrowing.
Well, they have had repeated energy shocks, for example. I mean, isn't what we're here?
Nothing like that.
Our problem was bigger than that.
There is a difference.
No, but all I was going to...
Well, just on energy, I was going to say that just on energy, in October 2022, when we were in government, inflation peaked at 11.1%, and that was because of the energy shock around the Ukraine war. We have not had an impact from even what's going on in the Middle East on our economy that is comparable to that shock we had at that time. And yet we still had a government where we had inflation bang on target at 2% on the day of the general election. It's been above target under this government all the way through their time in office for, at least 20 months at least.
Be that as it may, do you think we haven't reached, we might have reached a point of crisis in the economy where all parties need to suddenly look at the figures and radically rethink? And I say that because we had the report from the Office of Budget Responsibility this week. Yeah, saying that the present situation in terms of borrowing is unsustainable and that we would be borrowing or paying interest at a rate of 300% of GDP within this century. Of course, as you say, now it's about over 100%. And the underlying stress seemed to be that, successive governments, including Conservative governments and Labour as well, are basically ignoring this and continuing on a primrose path. Would you agree?
I wouldn't in the case of the Conservative Party. The reason why I would say that is that I think every party is saying things about the level of our debt, every single party out there, with the possible exception of the Greens, actually. But we are the only party that has actually come forward with what we call our golden economic rule, which is a clear binding rule that requires us to get that deficit down. And that is where we make savings in public spending, and we've identified about £50 billion worth of that, £23 billion a reduction in the welfare bill to get people off benefits and into work. Where we make those savings, then at least half of those savings has to go to driving down the deficit. That's quite a big constraint to operate under, but we are the only party that's actually coming forward and saying this is the kind of approach that we will have to controlling the level of debt, because it does need to be brought under control.
We're going to have a change of government lineup with the arrival of Andy Burnham. Would you like to see Rachel Reeves continue in her job as Chancellor, as the person you shadow?
Well, it's not for me to try and pick and choose who Andy Burnham is going to have as his Chancellor. But let me make a couple of observations. One is that when you listen to Andy Burnham and you listen to what he has to say on economic matters, it's fairly clear he's going to be leaning into wanting to spend more and also to put taxes up. And that is part of the approach that Rachel Reeves has taken that's led to the weak position that the economy is in at the moment. And the second thing is, Adam, I don't think in many ways it will matter a huge amount who it is as the next Chancellor, because the fundamentals of the fact that the Labour Party in Parliament is unable to take the tough decisions as backbenchers, for example, on getting the welfare bill down, getting people off benefits into work, I don't see that changing. And until you can grip spending, particularly the welfare budget, get taxes down on businesses and bear down on the debt, then I'm afraid things are very difficult and very constrained.
Even so, do you think Labour know rather more about running the economy than Reform UK, for example?
I think they both have essentially the same problem. They're slightly different. I think with Labour, you've seen them in office, and they have palpably failed to grow our economy in the way that they could have done if they'd taken different choices. So lots of borrowing and spending and taxing and so on, high unemployment, higher inflation, and all of those kind of things. With Reform, of course, what they are is a populist party that simply is prepared to say absolutely anything in order to get a headline and to try and get some votes that way, but without doing the hard work of actually explaining how you're going to pay for some of these promises. And that really is the road to ruin. We saw it incidentally in their last manifesto, £140 billion of unfunded spending commitments and tax cuts, that further on after the election, Nigel Farage just promptly turned around and said, oh, well, we didn't mean any of that. We're moving on from those kind of policies. Well, that's not good enough. If you're putting yourself up to run the government of our country, you have to be honest with the British people, and that's what we're doing. We are doing the painstaking hard work of explaining how we're going to get taxes down and how we're going to make savings in public spending and how we're going to deal with the deficit and in turn the debt.
I mean, obviously you would like the Conservatives to be back in power, but could I just ask you, if the Conservatives for one reason or another are not back in power, what's your answer to the Hobson's choice? Would it be better for the country to be run economically by Reform or by the continuing Labour Party?
There's a great hypothetical question there, and we just don't know what those parties are going to be offering at that particular moment in time. But for the reasons I've given, I think they are both a danger to the economy. Now, we've seen the track record of this government and what they've done. They've palpably mismanaged the economy. But I am increasingly worried by the kind of promises Reform come forward with. It seems that, for example, in the Makerfield by-election, a whole rash of suggestions came out about taking people out of tax on overtime. We had huge holes in there, a pubs plan that had a £10 billion black hole in the middle of it. These things really matter, because at the end of the day, getting back to your first question about the debt is so high that what matters now is the servicing cost on that debt. How much do we have to pay to service that debt? That's running at over 100 billion a year, rising to 140 billion, twice what we're spending on defence. So we have to maintain the confidence of the markets, and the kind of fiscal fantasies that Reform come out with in order trying to catch headlines and attention are just not realistic and responsible.
Well, in terms of maintaining the confidence of the markets, give us some names. I mean, we are where we are. There may or may not be a good chancellor. Who would be the worst appointment Andy Burnham could make?
Well, for the reasons I've given, Adam, in many ways I don't think it will make a huge amount of difference, because
things can always get worse as well as better, can't they?
Yeah. Well, and sadly they may do, but I think that will be driven, as I say, not by who's sitting in number 11, but more by the instincts of Andy Burnham to tax and spend more, and the fact that the Labour backbenchers are not going to have the backbone to back up the kind of decisions that really need to be taken, like getting on top of the welfare bill, if we're to move forward as a country. We incidentally have said to Labour that if they come forward with sensible welfare reforms, they're going to make a real difference and get people off benefits and into work, then we will support them in the House of Commons. So we'll see what comes forward in time.
Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed